Welcome back, everybody. So in the last couple of videos, we set up our auth manager. So looking at our architecture here, we have our SwiftUI views and our environment, and we put into the environment the auth manager. Now the auth manager is a class that is an observable, and we injected a service, either the Firebase service or the mock service, into the auth manager, which then the auth manager is accessible from our SwiftUI views. And this gave us a lot of flexibility because we can switch out our dependency. So if we wanted to change from Firebase to maybe Supabase or another auth provider, we would only now have to change out the service, and we don't have to change any of the code in this part of our app. So it's really easy now to switch out these dependencies. And adding this manager layer gave us a little bit of flexibility so that we have an instance in our application so we can hold data in memory. So in the auth manager, we're holding the user's auth. So for example, in the auth manager now, we're actually holding a reference to the user's auth in memory. So we started that section of the course with a struct as the service, and then we found that using the class is a little bit more flexible for general purposes. And this setup is basically what we're going to do for the rest of our dependencies in this course. So I'm talking about it now because the first time we did it, I wanted to walk through the idea of creating a struct, then creating a class, then injecting the struct into the class. But now that we understand that, we're going to go ahead and just start with this setup from the get-go. So in this video, we're going to start with a user manager. So in this video, we're going to start with our user manager. So just to quickly remind people who have maybe not built that many apps before, authentication is separate from your database. So when you think about your user profile in your app, that is separate from the user's authentication profile. So we've set up their authentication, but now we're going to set up their actual profile in our database. We actually haven't even set up the database yet, but you'll see as we get into this video that the actual profile is going to be in the Firestore database. So even Firebase has it as a totally separate product here. The authentication and the database are separate products. And in line with that, we're going to go ahead and make a separate manager for the user profile. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it. Let's paste one up here. Maybe we'll move this down a little bit. And we'll paste this one up here. And then we'll draw one more arrow just like this. So we're going to do roughly the same thing that we did for the auth manager, but for the user manager here. But I'm going to start with the code for the user manager because we know this is the setup that we want to end up with. The user's data is going to be stored in Cloud Firestore in our Firebase database. So let's go into the Firebase database and create a database real quick. We'll give it the default ID. I will use the United States as my hosting location. I believe this location should be not the location of where you are as the developer, but where probably the majority of your users are going to be. When the app goes to get data, it's going to ping this server. So if all of my users are going to be in Taiwan, then maybe I should put this as Taiwan, even if I was developing out of the United States. For me, it's the United States, and I'm also in the United States. We're going to go ahead and click Next. We're going to start. Let's start in test mode. We'll add security rules later. And let's click Create. Again, if you've never used Firestore, I will link the video below. I've done actually a series of videos on YouTube with how to use Firestore in detail. Because of that, we're going to move pretty quickly as we actually build out our database in this course. Once your database is set up, it should look roughly like this. We have nothing in it. We're going to create some collections here in just 1 second. Let's jump into our code base. Let's open up the navigator. And let's mimic the same style we have for our auth here. So we actually already have a users folder here where we created our user model. This is the user model that's going to be in our database. So we already started with some of this data here. Let's go ahead and right click and create a new empty file, and I'll call this the user manager. And I'll close the navigator. I'm going to click the plus up here for the add an editor on the right. And let's go full screen quick. On the right, I'm going to Option Command O and jump to the auth manager. And I'm going to roughly just copy what we did for the auth manager. So let's literally copy it, paste it here. This is going to be called our user manager. Obviously, we want to change our protocol. So let's go ahead and make a protocol called user service. And we'll replace that. This is no longer going to be auth. We'll set the value in memory to be called our current user. It'll be of type user model, which we already created. We don't have a listener here. I'll just delete that for now. We will inject our service. We don't have this method to get the user. So for right now, let's just set the self.currentUser equal to nil when we launch. And we don't have the add auth listener just yet either. So let's delete that as well. Unknown attribute, let's go ahead and import SwiftUI into this file. Great. Now in basically any app, the auth manager is the first and foremost most important data source. So the auth manager is creating our user ID. Those are the user IDs we were looking at in the last video. It's all of these IDs here. So we want to use these IDs when we go and we fetch our user database. So basically anytime that the user logs in through our auth, we should then update our user manager. So we make sure that we have the current user saved into memory. So I'm going to create a function here called login. It'll just be a generic function. And what I'm going to do is take the auth that we get from our auth success. So we created these functions here that return this data. So in here, every time we get any of these auth successes, whether it's anonymous or Apple, I'm going to also basically sync the auth manager to be updated so that it's the right user. Let's pass in here the auth of type user auth info and is new user of type bool. We can go ahead and make this async throws. Now this is the data from the user authentication, but this is the data model in our user database. So we want to convert this into our user model. Let's go ahead and jump into our user model quick. I'm going to open up the user model on the right. And on the left, I'll open up the user auth info. So firstly, we have a whole bunch of data points in our auth info that we don't have in our user model. Now we don't need it to be one-to-one, but I like to basically copy most of the auth information into our database as well. So I'm going to add in here some of the data that we're missing. So UID, we can now call user ID in our database. That's fine. Let's add in email. We'll make it optional string. Let's add in is anonymous for now. We'll make it a Boolean. We'll add in the creation date of type date, as well as the last sign in date of type date. And we already had date created in our code, but let's keep the new naming convention. So I'll delete date created for now. And then our user profile is going to have additional information. So did complete onboarding and the profile color hex. In our actual app, the user model probably is going to have a whole bunch of other stuff that the auth info does not have. Let's update our initializer here. I'm just going to comment this out so that the compiler will give us the new automatically created initializer. Triple click and Control M. I'll give these default values of nil. Let's actually make is anonymous a optional as well. And I'll make all of these nil to start. Cool. While we're in here, let's create one more initializer from the user auth info. So we'll pass in auth of type user auth info. Open the brackets. So from in here, I will call this initializer. So let's call self.init. And I will option enter on this, triple click, Control M. And this will be our auth.uid, auth.email, auth.isanonymous, auth.creationDate, auth.lastSignInDate. Then these two values we're going to keep as nil because we don't have this data coming from our auth data. So keep that as nil for now. And that should work. Let's go ahead and delete our original initializer. Let's go ahead and fix some of our compiler errors. Now, date created is now called creation date. And I'll just copy that down here as well. All right. When we go and we write the user model to our database, we are going to use the Codable protocol. Now, if you don't know how to use Codable, I will link videos below on how to use it just generally in Swift and also how to use it with Firebase. I went into detail in the Firebase bootcamp on basically my preferences on how to use it to be basically type safe so that we never have problems or errors using data models with Firestore. So Codable gives us default coding keys for all of these values, but I like to manually create so that we can reuse them and access the raw value later. So to do that, we're going to come down here and maybe just right after this initializer, we'll create coding keys. Click enter. And I'll give coding keys a raw value of string. And so by default, if we were going to use the default coding keys, user ID would look like this in our database, user ID. But when you are building apps, you should think about how other apps, not just the iOS app, might also use the same database. So if I create an Android app, the Android app needs to decode the same data model, same with my web app. And so when we're storing data in a database, it is oftentimes preferred by developers, definitely preferred by myself, to store everything with lowercase snake case rather than camel case. So reminder, this is camel case, how we type in Swift, but this is lowercase snake case. So everything is lowercase and you just put an underscore for the spaces. So that's how I prefer to store data into the database, and that's what we're going to do in this app. So user ID and email is going to be the same. We'll do is anonymous, creation date, last sign in date, did complete onboarding, and profile color hex. There's one other value that I like to store in my user profile, and that is the creation version. So if the user first installed my app on maybe version 1.2, 1.3, I like to store that so that I can reference it later so that I know which version this user came in on. And that's going to help me with some A/B testing. So when we go and we pass in our auth, let's also optionally pass in a creation version of type string. I'll just make one more variable up here. We're just going to say let creation version of type string, and let's just update our initializers here, equals nil, self.creation version equals creation version. Let's come down, and this one we have to update as well. Pass this in here. And here we're just passed in the creation version because it's not actually coming from the auth. And lastly, we need to add a key for it. So we'll create the creation version underscore version. Cool. Let's click play or build and run just to make sure that it does compile. Looks like it worked. Let's go ahead and add some code to actually write this to the database now. On the left, let's Command-Shift-O, open up the UserManager. So we have our login function. Let's go ahead and say let user equals the user model from our auth. And then we want to pass in the creation version, so we'll say let creation version equals, let's just only add the creation version if it's the first time they're logging in. So we'll say is new user, then we'll access our utilities, which we did in a previous video, .app version, otherwise no. Pass in the creation version. Now all we need to do is write this data model to Firebase. Out here, let's create our Firebase service. So again, we're going to make a struct. Remember that our Firebase auth service was a struct. We're going to do the same format for this. So here we're going to say Firebase user service, and it'll conform to the user service protocol. Now, to use Firebase, we're going to need to import the module. So let's open up our navigator. Let's go to our package. Let's go to our target. And inside our target, we imported Firebase auth. Let's also import Firestore, Firebase Firestore. Let's add that. Go back to our user manager. Now we should be able to import Firebase Firestore, not the internal one. I'll Command-Shift-O to let it recompile. Let's build and run, see if it compiles. All right, now when we are accessing our Firestore database, we need to point to some location in the database. And those locations are called collections in Firebase. So we'll make a variable called collection that is of type collection reference. In here, we'll access the firestore.firestore. So this is the entire database, and we'll point to the collection called users. And now let's create a function called saveUser. And we already have our user model, which conforms to Codable. So we'll pass in a user of type user model. We'll make this async throws. And then in here, we will try await. We'll access the collection. We're going to go to the document. Now, which document do we want to go to? We want to match the document ID to the user's ID. So we'll pass in the user.id or user ID for the document. And then we're going to set data on that document. Now we're going to look for the from and the merge completion here. So from meaning we can use anything that conforms to encodable or codable. So from this user, so all of these keys we're going to write to the document. And we almost always want to merge. Merge means that if there is other data in the document that we are not writing to, so if there's keys other than these, we're going to merge with the existing data rather than delete the entire document and only save this document. I think that's generally just a safer option when writing to Firebase. I guess this method is actually not async, so we'll just go ahead and remove that for now. All right, so this is the method now that we're going to use in our protocol. So we'll copy and paste it here for now. And then let's go ahead and test it out. So down here, we're going to try await service.saveUser. We'll pass in our user. Sending main actor isolated self.service to non-isolated instance. You guys should already recognize the problem here. The compiler does not know, because we're using the protocol, the compiler does not know that this service is a struct, meaning it does not know that this service is sendable. Let's just make sure user service conforms to sendable, just like auth service had to conform to sendable. There we go. That should work. All right, so let's actually try to log in now. So anytime that I'll go to my auth manager. So basically every time we open the app or anytime we sign in, I want to make sure that we are logged in to our user database correctly. I'll X out of the code completion on the left, open up the navigator here. So now firstly, let's get the user manager into the environment. Obviously it is observable. Let's Command-Shift-O and let's go to our environment builder view. So the same thing we did for the auth manager, we're just going to do for the user manager. And then this will be our Firebase user service. I love when things start to match up and we can start to see patterns across our code. Generally means that we're doing something good. And now let's go and actually save that user profile. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the app view where we are working for our user. We have this method check user status that runs every time. So if the user is authenticated, we want to log them in. If we create a new anonymous ID, we also want to then log them in. Up here, let's pull in our user manager. Call this the user manager. All right, down here. So if the user is already authenticated, let's go ahead and we'll do a do catch and we will try await. Let's call user manager dot login with the user. And if they're already authenticated, we'll assume that is new user is false. In here, let's just print out for now failed to log into auth for existing user. Maybe we'll print out the error as well. Now, if I am logging the user into the authentication and it's for some reason it failed to log into the user manager, I have a problem in my app. This generally should never happen, but it's possible. So what I like to do is, if this does fail, because the user is still authenticated, let's just run this entire method again, just to continuously try to figure out what's going on here until the user is fully successfully logged in. Because later we're going to also add a login method for purchases, so signing in for the user subscriptions and everything that they've paid for. And those are pretty important things that we want to make sure that are actually succeeding. So here I'm just going to add a try await task.sleep. Let's sleep for 5 seconds, and then let's just try again. We'll await check user auth status. So hopefully this doesn't happen, but at least we have like a safety net, a little extra catch in case this does. We'll add analytics to this later so that if this happens a lot in our app, we'll have to refactor this code so that it doesn't happen ever. Obviously, it's not a perfect solution, but I think it will work for most cases. Down here, if we successfully sign them in with a new user ID for anonymous, let's do the exact same thing. So we're already in a do catch, so I'm just going to copy this line of code, paste it here. I'll just do a little log in, and then I'm just going to copy the retry code and also paste it here. Let's update our error message and just be like, failed to sign in anonymously and log in. We'll pass in the error just in case that happens. Here, this should be the results.user and then the results.isNewUser, and that looks pretty good. One more place that we want to log in. So if we go to our create account view, we have sign in to Apple pressed. So when they do sign in with Apple, firstly, let's add in the new user ID into this. So we'll do results.user.uid, just so that we get that printout. If they do sign in, let's also log them into the app. So up here, let's go ahead and pull in our UserManager. We'll call this the UserManager. And then I'll go back and I'll copy the code from here and just paste it here as well. Let's print out did sign into Apple. And let's go ahead and results.user, results.isNewUser. Let's add another print statement, did log in. And I think that is all the code that we need. Let's go ahead and build our app to a simulator and let's actually try it out. I'm going to open up my database. I'll keep that on the left here. So hopefully we can see it in real time. And I see as soon as I loaded my app, I actually already have a user in my database. So this is the current user, is anonymous, is true, the last sign in date, and I got the user ID here as well. This looks pretty good already, and we barely even did anything. We just ran the app. So I'm going to now go through the code. Let's go into the actual app. Go ahead. It looks like it's working. Let's go into the profile screen. Let's go into the settings. And now I'm going to connect to sign in with Apple. When I do this, hopefully this updates and is anonymous gets changed, and maybe even my email comes through. Let's go ahead here and sign in. We'll sign in. And another user ID set up, because remember we had that duplicate user ID thing. So we must have signed into an existing account, which is actually the correct method here. So our other profile came in. Is anonymous is false. We got this user's email, and this is working great. I'm going to go ahead and delete this user's account just because we're playing around with some data here. So this should log me out. When I log out, it creates a new profile. So this is my new anonymous ID. And because it was a new user, we actually got our creation version here, which is awesome. Cool. I just had a simulator problem, so I had to restart my simulator. That's why there's a new picture here. But this looks like it is actually working exactly how we intended. When we create new users the first time, it's giving us the creation version and is anonymous with the user ID. And later we're going to add more data into this. You will notice that the keys here, the keys for all of these fields are lowercase snake case, which is exactly how we wanted them to be. I'm going to jump back to the code and look at the user manager. We have a lot more stuff to set up. I am well aware that we haven't done anything with the actual current user in memory yet, but we're going to get to that in a future video. For now, let's just go ahead and end this video. Let's Option Command C. Let's call this a feature, and we'll say User Manager, and I'll call this progress. Because it is not finished, I just want to put a note in the commit history that I have not finished the user manager yet. Let's go ahead and stage it. Let's commit it and push it up to GitHub. Thanks y'all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.